Okay, I think we'll go on with the program, and everyone else that will join us will find us in the middle of our program. Good morning, and welcome to the launch of the 2020 Business and Society Handbook. I'm your host, Neo Mangope, and welcome to the 23rd edition of the industry leading publication. Well, thank you for joining us, and we have many people joining us that have signed up, and many more are still joining. And many of these people would be your corporate CSI practitioners, and many of you, I could see the names that I can recognize. So warm welcome and hello to you all. Just a few technical notes. I'd like for us to just use the chat function and encourage you to post any comments throughout the session, ask questions, and the Q&A functionality will be open throughout the sessions. You can do this with the Q&A functionality at the bottom of the screen. We'll be going through and addressing as many of your questions as possible during the Q&A sessions after the presentations. So please direct any of your questions to one or more of the panelists and keep it short and succinct. This session is being recorded, and the notes and the slides recorded will be made available to everyone that registered. Also, our hashtag for today, which has been the hashtag and the social hashtag for the year, is hashtag BIS 2020. Please use it on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, tagging Trialogue's account. Oh dear, this is exactly what I was afraid of. My computer has now frozen. Would like to go to the next slide. And in today's program and agenda will be hosted by our own director, Kathy Duff, giving us the handbook overview, our guest speaker, Carl Bates, and hosting the Strategic CSI Awards would be Gugu McLaurin, as well as Anthony. And my colleague Rebecca as well will be sharing our handbook findings. Kathy will also be answering your Q&A and the discussion session. Then we shall be closing our presentation for today. So for those that may or may not know about Trialogue, please allow me to give you a brief overview of what we do. So Trialogue is one of the few consultancies that focuses exclusively on responsible business. Our tagline, supporting better business. We do this through advisory, consultancy services, knowledge sharing platforms, all of which have a vision of making CSI in South Africa more effective. The two main types of consulting that we do are monitoring and evaluation and CSI strategy development. We have a quick new strategy refresh offering, assisting executives and boards with thinking through the changes that they need to make because of this new pandemic. On our knowledge sharing platforms, we publish our annual Business Society Handbook, and today marks the 23rd edition of this industry publication. We also run an annual conference, which we held virtually last month, and most recent platform, the Knowledge Hub, which has now our dedicated section on the business response to COVID-19. I'd like us to take this opportunity to thank all of you that registered and all of you that supported us on our knowledge sharing platforms, and those that have participated into the handbook and sponsored the conference, and those that have taken up topics onto the Knowledge Hub. We couldn't do this without you. And we really feel like these knowledge sharing platforms assist everyone in the sector and help them make CSI effective across the board. All of our products and services are in support with our vision, which is society in which business anticipate long-term challenges and respond to these responsibly, not through self-regulation and compliance, but with the laws of the land, but through inspired leadership and consistently innovates to benefit all of the stakeholders. In this vision, economic growth and sustained and equitable for all citizens. Next on our agenda, we'll be having our very own director, Kathy Duck, sharing on the handbook overview. Over to you, Kathy.
Thanks, Neo, and good morning, everyone. Sorry about the few technical hitches there. I have changed the settings, so you can all change your chat settings to all panelists and attendees, which would be great. So my job today is to give you a little taster of some of the content of the handbook and the theme. I'm going to leave the stats to my colleague Rebecca for later. So we started the year intending for the theme of the book to be a reflection on our achievements with a decade left to achieve the Global Sustainable Development Goals and the objectives of the local National Development Plan. However, the best intentions for 2020 very quickly devolved into an emergency response for COVID-19. And while we still cover our progress towards the SDGs and the NDPs in an article, which has been severely hampered by COVID, the rest of the edition now has shifted to explore how companies, nonprofits, and governments across the world are responding to the pandemic that is forcing physical distancing, but presenting a unique opportunity for social reconnection. I'd just like to reiterate Neo's thanks before I go into some of the content, particularly to all of our partners who are on the line for participating in the handbook, either through completing what I know is a rather lengthy questionnaire, or through placing your advertorials or case studies in the handbook. We really couldn't have done it without you. And then I want to say a special thank you to our Trialogue team, the handbook team. It's been an extraordinary year. With our conference moving to October, we've been working on the conference and the handbook at the same time. And a special thank you to Fiona and to Gillian for managing this handbook process, and then to Neo and Maklo for liaising with all of our partners. Okay, so if you can go down there. So the handbook starts with an overview of our research findings, which I'm not going to go into as Rebecca would. And then chapter 2 looks at the various development sectors. And as I'm sure you're all aware, no sector of society has been left untouched by the pandemic. So in chapter 2, we consider initiatives put in place by government, companies, and nonprofits to address the impact in each sector. The example on the screen is the health sector. And for each of the sectors, we provide some national statistics. So we provide the initial government budget, the revised government budget, some of the government interventions in that sector, as well as some of the stats around the needs and outcomes in the sector. We then provide the findings of our primary research into the breakdown of expenditure per sector. And then for each sector, you'll see the little box there. We have a short write-up on the impact of COVID-19 and the lockdown on that sector, and what corporates did to try and alleviate that. So in education, we look at how corporates supported the shift to online learning. In health, how companies pivoted to support the health response. In food security, the huge efforts to alleviate hunger. The efforts to help small businesses, to assist the homeless. Each sector goes into some of that. Thanks, Neo. Then chapter 3 contains the bulk of the features in the handbook. It's entitled Pandemic Perspectives, and it contains articles on how businesses in South Africa and globally have responded, and how corporate social investment has become an even more important function of the business. This article that you see up now, When Leaders Lead, considers how government, business, and civil society leaders responded during the crisis. It looks at the difference between those leaders that were guided by science and those that weren't. It considers some of the implementation challenges and how they were addressed, as well as some of the qualities needed to lead. One of the interesting things for me in this article is some of the results of a survey McKinsey did with CEOs around the world about shifts in leadership during the pandemic, and which of these shifts we should look to keep in the future. And I'd just like to pull out 2 of those. The first is to think bigger and faster. So I think all organizations and leaders had to change operations and policies almost overnight to respond to the crisis and emerging demands. Companies acted boldly and with speed. How can this type of decision-making and leadership be taken forward? To work from home or cutting back on travel time. For me, the next shift, and the last I want to touch on, and there's some great quotes from CEOs on this, was that CEOs needed to bring more of themselves into the workplace through this crisis, to show a vulnerable side and to be a lot more empathetic. Many CEOs commented on this in the survey, and it was one of the big findings. And one of them said it forged a stronger, more cohesive and motivated workforce. So again, how can we take these qualities forward in leaders and look at leadership pipeline, not only as the skills that people have, but even more so on the qualities of the character and attributes of leaders. So I think there has been a big shift in leadership, and that's touched on in this article. The next article, if you can go down there, is COVID-19 and corporate citizenship in South Africa. This outlines how local companies responded and provides examples. And they responded first and foremost by protecting their employees, and then looking also to customers and suppliers. The article then goes on to consider the social response of companies in South Africa. We look at is what is called corporate social innovation. How do companies leverage their core assets and competencies to respond to the pandemic? And then corporate social investment, how companies responded through their CSI. And I think you've all provided great examples of that in the case studies and advertorials, and some of that is captured in this article. What the pandemic has proved is that the fragmented private sector can adopt a shared business agenda in a crisis. And this should be taken forward to help rebuild the country. The creation of Business for South Africa, for example, proved that business can play a unifying role and can advocate for the socio-economic outcomes it would like to see. The next article moves on to look at global, how global companies have responded. Now, if you can just move down. And it takes you through the response, recovery, reinvention journey of some global companies with some examples. I think some interesting insights out of this article and some learnings are what companies can take forward, including the need to create crisis plans that inform decision making so that action in future can be swift and agile. Need to engage stakeholders regularly, genuinely, and transparently. The need to integrate digital technologies across all organizational functions, and the need to reimagine the future, thinking carefully about the adaptability of the business, considering different scenarios, and preparing for and expecting ongoing change. So that article takes you through some of those learnings, which I think apply not only to the businesses, but to our functions as corporate social investment practitioners as well. The chapter then includes a feature on how COVID-19 has reshaped the non-profit sector. It starts by looking, and I'm not sure if it's big enough, but the subtitle there is a sector in peril. So it starts by providing some of the research statistics from Trialogue's own research, but also various other studies that have been done through the year that have shown the impact of the crisis on nonprofits in terms of increased demand and decreased funding, and also not much government support. So it starts by saying a sector in peril, and then it moves on to say, how have nonprofits adapted? Many of them have adjusted their programs, introduced new services, they've adapted their ways of working, they've changed their fundraising strategies. And in fact, there's an entire separate article looking particularly at fundraising and how it's shifted and how it needs to shift going forward. Nonprofits have also forged new alliances, and they've advocated for new forms of support and policy shifts. So again, this article concludes by looking at how NPOs need to adapt and build as they navigate the future. And one thing to bear in mind is the need to leverage and build on the positives that have emerged from the crisis. And we feel some of these are more transparent and equitable relationships with funders and donors. I'm sure this rings true for many of you who've had to communicate with your partners like never before. The enhanced use of technology by nonprofits and greater collaboration, not only with partners, but also within the sector. The last article I just want to touch on is related to this, and I think of interest to many of our corporate partners, and it's around capacity building in the nonprofit. sector. This article appears in chapter 6 from our primary research with both nonprofits and corporates on capacity building. It shows that most companies do provide some form of capacity building to their nonprofit partners. This is most often in the form of workshops and training. Similar finding was found from the nonprofits, where most of them had actually received some capacity building support from their corporate partners. Again, most likely in the form of workshops and training. And the article outlines all the different types that can be provided. What emerged, however, was the insight that flexible funding for internal capacity building was the intervention most desired by nonprofits, but least provided by corporates. Flexible funding makes it easier for organizations to include capacity building as part of their ongoing strategy, and it also allows them to choose the capacity building interventions that are needed for their business. So I think food for thought for both nonprofits and corporates in this article. Okay, I just want to close off with a reflection on the broader role, and I'm going to, Neo, if you could just launch the poll while I talk through this. So corporate social investment may be a convenient entry point into the responsible business conversation, but it is just one of many business responsibilities. And the poll is just asking you, it's a forward-looking question, just asking you which statement you think best describes how you expect the role of CSI to change next year. So creating shared value goes well beyond the notion of CSI, making far greater demands on the business than the 1% of net profit after tax. While CSI has social, and if done strategically, and we'll move on to that with our strategic award, shared value must form part of the business model and be driven from the top. So what can you do? Firstly is about encouraging companies to start by looking internally. Equitable employment, wages, gender equity, inclusivity and diversity of the workforce. Then looking at products and services, how inclusive and accessible are these? What more can be done? And then considering some of the ways that the company might address the shocking inequality in this country beyond just CSI. How can your company support the functioning of government and municipalities? How can it help to address the scourge of violence in our society? How can it move the needle on the shocking youth unemployment statistics? These issues can no longer be ignored. Okay, I think, let's see, how has everyone voted in the poll? I'm going to close it shortly because I'm going to finish off now, and I hope that this has given you a taste of some of the content of the handbook, and that you find it again a useful resource for the work that you're doing, and that the articles and topical viewpoints are interesting. Obviously, I've only included a few of the articles here. There's a lot more. There's also our expert viewpoints as well as some of the conference insights. And we've certainly learned a lot from putting the handbook together. We'd also welcome your feedback. With that, I'm going to close the poll and we're going to move on to Carl. Thanks, Neo.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm trying to move on to the next slide.
And I think you can all see the poll results that I've just shared, and I think it speaks to that closing statement with 37% of you, most of you, and the next highest amount being shared value, but saying that CSI will be a key element, but there's more influence from how companies undertake their core business. And then next was that companies will move towards a more shared value model, and CSI will be absorbed or integrated into the business. So I think that's in line with those closing statements, and it's the kind of philosophy of the handbook as we've shifted from, you know, just being a CSI handbook to a business and society broader role handbook. Thanks, Noah.
Thank you, Kathy. Next on our agenda, we have our Trialogue Business and Society Handbook findings, and I hand over to my colleague, Rebecca Mary. I beg your pardon. We hand over to Carl.
Thanks very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be the keynote speaker for this event. And this world of 2020 has been interesting for all of us, and I think I've done more online conversations and video presentations as a keynote speaker this year than I ever will in my life. But with that in mind, I really would like you to take some value out of the next 14 or 15 minutes or so around the role that companies play in rebuilding. And so with that in mind, I'd like you to make sure you have your pen and your paper out. And as I go through the next few slides and conversation around both the lockdown collection that's inspired the cover of the Business and Society Handbook this year, and where my expertise lies, which is in the boardroom and in the role governance and boards of directors play in influencing this conversation, I'm going to share with you 8 insights that I think are relevant to your role as a CSI practitioner or as someone who's in the influence of CSI decisions within business, so that you can support the role that companies play in rebuilding post-2020. Thanks, Neo. So we all know the impact that COVID-19 had, and I didn't want to spend too much time, if indeed any time, speaking about the challenges that have come out of COVID-19 this year. I think we all understand the impact in a South African context as we head towards 38-ish% unemployment by some commentators' perspective in terms of where we'll end at year end. The view that we've lost 1 in 5 jobs here in South Africa during the course of 2020 as a direct result of COVID-19. But the point I wanted to make at this juncture, as we go into where COVID-19 inspired the lockdown collection, was the first point for you as a CSI practitioner. And that is, don't forget the other challenges. So if you've got your pen and paper there, as I say, just write down those words. Number 1, don't forget the other challenges. And I think so often it's easy to get caught up in the world of COVID and forget the impact that so many other things are having on society at large. And we need to make sure that we don't turn all of our attention to this one thing and forget some of those significant other activities that are occurring in our world, and without support will not be able to continue into the future. Thanks, Noah. So where did COVID-19 play a role in inspiring the lockdown collection? And the way I always tell the story is taking everyone back to President Cyril Ramaphosa announcing the lockdown back in March. And I don't know where you were, but I remember where I was sitting on the couch next to my son, who was 18 months old at the time, watching the announcement of the 21-day lockdown here in South Africa. And I turned to Angus and I said, Angus, you won't remember this day, but this day is going to go down in history. And over the course of the next 24 hours, this idea grew in my mind, eventually resulting in a voice note I sent to a colleague by the name of Lauren Wolfe, and conceptualizing, if you like, the idea of the lockdown collection. 21 days, 21 artists, 21 impacts. And the idea was to release over the course of the 21-day lockdown, 21 pieces of work that would be iconic for South Africa in capturing the moment in South African history. Because COVID-19 had a significant, or continues to have a significant health impact, a significant economic impact, but it also is having a social impact that will be remembered and have consequences, I think, for many years to come. And we wanted to make sure that that moment was captured in the moment through the lockdown collection. And as a result of that, over the successive 48 hours, and we call it the 48-hour team, thanks now, there were 3 of us as the founders, myself, Lauren Wolfe, and Professor Kim Berman, who's a professor at the University of Johannesburg and the executive director of Artist Proof Studio, who formed a team along with a bunch of volunteers to conceptualize, plan, and launch this initiative in 48 hours. And we literally launched it within 48 hours, fully funded, in terms of all of the days of the lockdown collection. The 21 days were underwritten by business, so that we knew that going into this initiative, we already had the funds to support its launch. And here comes point number 2. And so again, pen and paper, point number 2, bigger purpose creates attraction. And I think sometimes when we think about CSI and we think about social impact and social investment, we think about the social side. So obviously the lockdown collection has a massive contribution into vulnerable artists in South Africa and supporting vulnerable artists. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that more in a moment. But the key to the success and the attraction of the funding was a bigger purpose around capturing the moment in South African history. And it was those two things that enabled this project to be as successful as it was, as quickly as it was. The third point comes actually out of the 3 founders you see on the screen. I think what's really interesting about this group is how different our experience and our background is. I'm a businessman, no shame about saying it. I come from an entrepreneurial, business scaling up, capitalist perspective. Lauren is a creative, she is a brilliant entrepreneur, but she sort of bridges the world of business to the world of art. And of course, Professor Kim is an academic, as well as an artist in her own right, a successful artist in her own right, and someone who leads the education of artists in a huge way through Artist Proof Studio in South Africa. And here is the third point. CSI teams need diversity too. And I don't mean diversity in the sort of traditional way we might think of diversity in 2020 in terms of race, color, and creed. I'm talking about diversity in terms of the context of diversity of thought and perspective. And I think one of the key successes of the lockdown collection was that there was this combination of people from the art world who said, no, but that's not how it works here. And people like me from the business world who said, yeah, but we don't have time to think about it. And I'll never forget the morning of the first day of lockdown in South Africa, where there was debate over what piece of art was going to launch the lockdown collection. And now if you click over to the next screen, that'd be great. We launched with Gordon Froud and his piece COVID-19 on day 1. And I'll never forget that morning where there was still that sort of artistic creative energy you get when you put a bunch of creatives together and a little bit of indecision. And I pulled a piece of Angus's art off the fridge and I put it on the front of the Zoom screen. And I said, guys, if we don't decide who's launching this today, we're going to launch with Angus's piece of school art. And it's that sort of energy you sometimes need to ensure a project is successful. So point 3, ensure there is diversity of thought in your CSI teams in the way in which you're making decisions in terms of the projects and project success. Thanks, Now. I think that the 4th point comes from understanding where the lockdown collection went. So at the beginning of the lockdown collection, we started with 2 key things. One was the idea of capturing the moment in South African history, and the other was supporting vulnerable artists here in South Africa through what we created and called the Vulnerable Artist Fund. I think one of the perspectives of the creation of this fund was that it needed to have sustainability. And certainly in my journey around social entrepreneurship, and while I've had a business career and a successful business career in commercial business, I've had a long-standing involvement, and in fact, my involvement in boards of directors originally came from being involved in social enterprise and being a director of a non-profit dementia care facility in New Zealand. But project sustainability is critical. And one of the ways we created project sustainability in the Vulnerable Artist Fund was we require any artist who gets a grant from the fund to provide a piece of work back into the fund at some stage in the future, which the fund can then sell and ultimately use to replenish the funds. And you create this model of sustainability. And so point number 4 is project sustainability is key. I think with some CSI projects, they're open and shut projects. You know, there's a start and an end, and that's the intention. But sometimes that can leave a hole in the community or in the space that you've had an impact on, because they've had this opportunity, they've had this support, they've had this impact, but then there's no ongoing sustainability in that project. And I think certainly when I wear a director's hat in the businesses of which I'm either an independent chairman or an independent director, I look for sustainability in the things we do. And I think in the conversations you're having with your boardrooms, with your executive teams, with managers, particularly with, let's be frank about it, business people like me, you're looking to answer that question of sustainability. And so from there we go to, where do projects go and where do they lead and why are we here? And I'd love to put this image on the screen, thanks Noah, of the front cover, the piece of art that has inspired the cover of the Business and Society Handbook for 2020. And every time I see this piece and speak about this piece, I get goosebumps, because I think it's such a powerful metaphor for 2020. And even with everything that's happened this year and with the impact on us socially, in our businesses, economically, this piece says, and as it's entitled, "And yet I smile." And I really just would like you to reflect as you end 2020 off. What is it that you can smile about? What is it that you can take from this year and take into the future? And so, as I say, and yet I smile. And the insight that comes for me here, point number 5 for you, is you never know where a project could go. Because what you might not know about this image is this image comes from the Lockdown Collection Extension Collection, so TLC Extension Collection. This was envisaged or occurred as a result of the extension of the South African lockdown. And this project continues to have impact and grow legs that frankly, I could have never imagined when we conceptualized it back 48, 72 hours prior to lockdown here in South Africa. And I have to just add to that, there's a professor from the United States of America who said about the lockdown collection during the lockdown back in May, that it was and is the most significant artistic response to COVID-19 on planet Earth right now. And so my thought for you as a practitioner is think about and remember, and maybe it's to inspire or to re-encourage you, that wherever your project might be now or a project you start in the future, remember that you'll never truly be sure where the project could go and what will grow from the impact that you're having through the activity that you're doing right now. And so thanks now. I want to thank the team for inviting me to be part of this, and more importantly, inviting the Lockdown Collection to provide the images for the Business and Society Handbook 2020, because it truly captures, I think, the moment and this time in history in terms of 2020. Now, I know I've only got a couple of minutes left, and so if we click along, I want to make a statement that I think we all know. It's extensively recognized that governance increases your bottom line and the financial results achieved for shareholders. And this is something that as a director, I'm acutely aware of. I think the shift as we go forward is more and more about those last 3 words, and other stakeholders. Thanks, Noah. So when you think about directors and you're thinking about the directors of your businesses, and I'm going to tie this to your role in terms of a CSI practitioner. At the SADAR group, and our role is supporting boards, that's what we do across the continent. we challenge directors to think about this idea of how good directors grow companies, but indeed great directors change lives. And so as we take this thought into the next step, thanks, Nao, at the Citizens Group, our promise is this idea of meaningful economic impact. And we talk about that in the context of how are the things we're doing, the businesses that we're involved in, having economic impact in the countries we operate in across the continent that creates meaningful, sustainable impact in those countries. And so point number 6 here, and I have 2 more to come after this, is how are you connecting your CSI to the promise of the businesses in which you're involved? So in short, connect to the business promise. The lockdown collection connected, and there were ways in which we directly connected the plan and the project to things we did within our team during the lockdown to create a direct connection between our business and this particular project. I don't have time, unfortunately, to go into those connections today, but if anyone wants to reach out to me and ask me about those, feel free to do so. I'll post my Twitter handle in the chat box after. So thanks, Nao. So bringing this together and bringing it to land for you, how relevant are you? Or how are you relevant to your board, to your executive, to your business? And I suppose being slightly controversial in the context of CSI and business, what are the ways in which you make your programs blatantly connect to the business in which you're involved? And again, I'm happy to share offline some stories that would connect that together for you. But the point I want you to make as number 7 here is you must sell the story to get the bucks. The lockdown collection didn't create the funding that it did in the time that it did because people just wanted to support vulnerable artists. People stepped up and supported the project because we created a brand and a story that connected with the hearts and the minds of the people we were asking to support it. We were looking for funding. You might not be looking for funding, but you are looking for internal support from your business for the programs that you're involved in. And you have to blatantly sell that story to the business that you're involved in and the board that ultimately makes that decision. And so lastly, thanks, Nao, I go to the slide which comes from Siddhar's story, and Siddhar is the name given to the lead Sherpa on a mountain expedition. So we use the mountaineering story in the way we tell stories about business and around how you need to go about doing things in any aspect of the board and of business. And I think my message, wearing a director hat to you, is that it is the preparation at base camp, not during the climb, that gets you to the summit. And so in the conceptualization stage of any CSI project, make sure you present it in a way that answers the questions that your directors and your executives will have. Because number 8, and you can write this down as number 8, directors will interrogate it. And I think to close off that comment, directors will want to see the evaluation of the project. So do that properly. And as a chartered accountant, I have to say, tie it to the numbers. I hope that's given you not only an insight to the lockdown collection and why it's connected to the Business and Society Handbook 2020. And thanks to the team for the initiative and for still investing in doing this and among everything else that's happened this year. But I also hope it's given you a couple of thoughts about how you can take your CSI activity to the next level as you move in to 2021. So thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much, Carl. And I must say that beautiful lockdown picture is very wonderful. I mean, automatically makes you want to smile. So we've got many things to be grateful for. Next on our agenda, we are presenting the annual Trialogue Strategic CSI Award. And these will be our judges, Gugu McLaren, I beg your pardon, if I pronounce your surname incorrectly, Oshowen Kunzi, and Anthony Wilson Prangling. Gugu McLaren Mushuunkunzi heads the Social Transformation Program at the NBI, which is the National Business Institute, and Anthony Wilson Prangley lectures in the area of leading social change with emphasis on dynamics of leadership, human behavior, and diversity it gives. Over to you both.
Thank you very much, Nao. I'm going to kick things off on behalf of Gugu and myself. I am, as mentioned, a lecturer at the Gordon Institute of Business Science. I'm a senior lecturer there. I specialize in social impact, impact investing, business and society issues, with a particular interest in entrepreneurial organizations. And it's been an honor to be involved with this award now, I think for 7 years. I can be corrected in the chat. But I think since 2014, and it really has been a fantastic journey. For those of you who have heard about this award, maybe some of you have applied for it, or some of you have previously been an award winner or shortlisted. A big welcome. My colleague who helped judge with me will give you some more details, and we'll be making the formal announcement on the winners and the shortlisted finalists, or those that we have accredited or realized that they've done special work in the 2020 year. I'm going to give a bit more background on what this award is, on what it's for, and how it can, and why we need it. Now I'm wondering if you can just give me the next slide, that one. Yeah, no further. That's perfect. So this is the way that Trialogue thinks about CSI, and I think it's a very powerful matrix, a 2x2 matrix that gives us 4 different types of CSI, and it's really a useful framework for you to think about where your spend is and where you'd like it to be, and what different skills it takes in each of the 4 quadrants. And you can engage with Trialogue, who will very happily consult and help you figure this out if you're interested. So just going to the bottom left, we have what would be called charitable grant making. You know, this has been particularly important during this period, where there are emergency needs. And although the grants that are made are not necessarily going to make a catalytic difference over 3, 4, 5, 10 years, they deal with the emergency issues of today. And they might not have anything to do with your company, but are incredibly important in terms of what society needs, and in terms of what the needs are on the ground. So I would really recommend that a part of your portfolio of CSI is reactive towards needs that emerge in the business areas that you focused in. Moving from along the bottom part there, we move along towards higher amounts of corporate benefits. So commercial grant making allows charitable causes or social causes to access more commercial funding, which is good for society. And we think about cause-based, cause-related marketing here, or about investments that might help pave the way for further business, that have a very strong commercial benefit and a moderate long-term social benefit, but which do achieve important social outcomes. And I think particularly about marketing-oriented spending here being particularly important, and this is an important area of CSI. Then we move up to the top left, the developmental CSI, and really what this matrix is showing us is that, you know, as you move upwards, things become stronger and more impactful, and this is really crucial for the long-term interests of South Africa. Developmental CSI. I think about strategic work with government around education as crucial in this regard, and we really also I think want to encourage better and more developmental CSI. This award is focused on the top right-hand quadrant, and so we want to acknowledge best practice in strategic CSI. Strategic CSI is a form of CSI that has a developmental impact, a long-term sustainable impact for the country, as well as being good for the business. I'll give you 3 examples from past winners that I think illustrate the kind of ways that your business can be aligned with social impact, and it links a lot with the chat that you've been having up until now. So one of our early award winners was the Singita School of Cooking, a chef school of Singita Lodge on the edge of the Kruger National Park, where they worked with the community to improve, to select young, talented people who are interested in becoming chefs, and they train them on an annual basis to become chefs. And but out of the 10 people that they train, perhaps only 1 or 2 will come and work at Singita. What that means is they get the best talent into their kitchen, which is incredibly important in the hospitality and tourism industry. But it also means they improve the cooking and food experience of surrounding lodges, of their competitors, of the surrounding ecosystem. And what that means is that the whole region attracts a higher end, better local and international clientele. We gave it an award a few years ago to the Singita School of Cooking for the Strategic CSI Award. Another project that we awarded a few years ago was the Aeci WaterWise program. This worked with communities upstream of an Aeci plant, an Aeci factory, to improve the quality of the water. This was good for the environment, good for the community, but also good for the factory, because it meant that the quality of water that was coming into the factory was better, less harmful to the operations of Aeci, and it allowed them to partner with other businesses in the area. And so I think those are 2 good examples. We also, in the first year that we announced this award, awarded Netcare this award for their work leveraging the Netcare infrastructure to enable women who had been raped, or men had been raped, to come in and gather the evidence they needed for prosecution, as well as to receive just world-class care, both psychological and medical, in this traumatic experience. And so they use their business infrastructure. So sometimes it's about what the business can do, and sometimes it's about how the business might benefit. But it's close to the core operations and leveraging the footprint of your business. This is what strategic CSI is about. And Kathy's right, not all projects should be strategic CSI. The other quadrants are incredibly important. And what I would argue from my experience as 7 years judging this award is that what's key is that you do each quadrant well. Wherever the project might sit, if you're developmental, then get really into how that impact is going to happen. If you're about, for example, improving maths and science marks in a school system, are you really doing that? Is your money making a material difference? Are you tracking the report cards of students through your program? Are you tracking their matric marks? Are you tracking where they go after the program in terms of into other educational opportunities? Because that is ultimately your goal. But too often we count, I think too often, especially if you look on the left-hand side around social benefit, too often we count the money we spend, we count the activities that happen, and we don't count the actual impact that has and whether it's making a material benefit. And that is crucial. And so the winners tend to be those organizations that are tracking and bring great data to show that they're not just spending money, but they're having impact. So yes, I will pause there and hand over to Gugu, who will talk through this year's results and submissions, and just to thank Trialogue again from my side for the opportunity to be involved. Gugu, do you want to come? I would normally invite you up onto the
with an envelope for me to open and
an envelope for you to open.
Exactly.
Not play.
Exactly. They say Trevor Noah is going to host the Grammys. Gugu is going to announce the winners of Trialogue's strategic CSI Awards. So we've all got our special moments. Thank you, Anthony, so much. For setting up the background and really giving insight into how it is that we judged it. It was my first year judging the awards, and I really enjoyed understanding in a lot more depth how companies are thinking about CSI and what exists throughout the country. So it was a real pleasure to do that. And so I have the honor of sharing with you the winner and 3 honorable mentions, companies that we felt did exceptionally well in this year's awards. So the first one I would like to mention is Nedbank's Proud of My Town. And this we felt was a really fantastic project, because I think it is one that has developed over a number of years, that has very clearly thought through objectives, outcomes, and impacts that are measured very well. And really it's about working within small towns and identifying the needs within those towns, and investing for social impact in a host of areas around ECD, sports, or art, for example. And we thought that there was quite a clear link between the business and community within this project. And so for us, this is an honorable mention to Nedbank. And I believe there is someone from Nedbank joining us, Bulelani, and truly from Nedbank. So congratulations for this commendable award, this commendable project. The other project that we thought was really interesting and quite a different take was Growth Point's GEMS project, which is really focused internally, and it is a bursary program for Growth Point employees. And here, quite obviously, the link between the CSI investment and the value in terms of employee engagement, and broader community as well, was very clear. Again, a very well thought through project, and supported by a theory of change, which means that the measuring and tracking of how it's working, we thought was really good. And again, we're joined by Linda Pangwe from Growth Point Properties, and so congratulations for that. We also thought very highly of Transnet Pelopepa healthcare trains, and like the fact that Transnet uses its infrastructure to reach marginalized communities, to deliver healthcare in mobile clinics for a range of different screenings for cancer, diabetes, etc. And also quite a long-standing project with quite clear outcomes. And we thought, again, another example of building on your core business to deliver social impact beyond. So congratulations to the 3 commendable projects. It was really great to see the thoughtful approach that you've taken to delivering social impact. But now to move to the winner of Trialogue Strategic CSI Award of 2020. And if there was a drum roll, I would ask for it, but you can do it on your desk. And that award goes to Pick and Pay School Club. And congratulations, yes. Pick and Pay. And Ante and I were really blown away by this project, and we were blown away by the project itself. We were also blown away by the application and just how much information and detail went into the application process for this. So the Pick and Pay School Club really is about reaching quite a significant number of learners and families. I think it's about 2 million every year, providing education for schools around a host of different issues and topics. And what's really interesting about this is how Pick and Pay has clearly thought through the full value chain that they're making use of, from their core business to their suppliers, to their customers and broader society. These links are very clear in the work that they do in this project. Again, supported very deeply with very clear theory of change, measurement and evaluation, clear outcomes and impacts that Pick and Pay is aiming to achieve here. And a really important project. And so we were really delighted to understand more about it. It reaches a significant number of learners and schools, and it is commendable. And I think the full details are in the handbook, and you'll be able to read through in detail and see very real numbers of what this project has been able to achieve. But again, to say that we were blown away by this work, and we encourage you to read more about it. And I think there are lessons in how it's been thought through. And maybe Nadine Visser, who's here from Pick and Pay School Club, can share some of those thinkings around what went into conceptualizing this project. So once again, congratulations Pick and Pay and Growth Point, Nedbank and Transnet for your efforts and the great work that you're doing. And thank you Trialogue for the opportunity to host. And Anthony, it was a pleasure hosting alongside with you. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Gugu.
Thanks, Gugu. Nao, I don't know if Nadine is online, if she wants to just say hi and just share her reactions.
Hi, yes, thanks so much, Anthony and Gugu. I mean, we really are incredibly honored. The program Pick and Pay School Club started about 17 years ago with 500 schools supported with one workbook. And we now support over 3,000 schools across South Africa, primary and high school, with educational content. This year with COVID, we were also able to use the infrastructure to hand out about 30,000 food parcels with Pick and Pay's Feed the Nation. We did 750,000 soaps with the Willowton group. It's just the infrastructure that we've been able to create with the schools has allowed us to really make a change in those communities. So it really has been a fantastic year for us. We really feel that we have made massive impact in the communities that we work with, and we're very grateful that we have these opportunities to be able to do so. So thank you very much.
Brilliant, well done. And I think it's an indication of the way in which a long-running track record with a specific focus over many, many years can build the kind of infrastructure and reputation and networks that allow for a positive response to the crisis we face. So thank you, and I'll hand back then to Nao.
Thank you very much, Ant, and well done to Pick and Pay School Club. Next on our agenda, we'll be having Trialogue's Business and Society Handbook findings, and my colleague Rebecca Mere will be presenting. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks. Hope you can all hear me. Good morning, everyone, and well done again to Pick and Pay and to all the shortlisted projects. It's really great to see such wonderful work coming through in the award. I wish I could see you all today, but nonetheless, I'm very pleased to present the highlights of our 2020 CSI research to you. But before I start, I'd just like to thank once again all the corporates and NPOs that took the time to complete the survey. You really make this possible. This year we had 75 corporate respondents and 115 NPO respondents completing online and telephonic surveys in the midst of lockdown between the months of April and August 2020. So looking at overall CSI expenditure, every year Trialogue estimates total CSI expenditure in South Africa. That is expenditure beyond just what is reported by our sample, but also including listed South African companies, multinationals working in South Africa, and state-owned entities. And it includes cash and non-cash giving. And this year, we estimate that number to be 10.7 billion rand. This represents an almost 5% increase compared to last year, and equates to a marginal 1.2% growth in real terms. That is taking out inflation, of course. CSI budgets are often determined as a percentage of net profit after tax and based on the company's financial performance of the previous year. And with our research showing a median decline of 12.7% in NPAT in 2020, we would normally predict with some degree of certainty a negative impact on CSI budgets to come. However, 2020 has been anything but normal, and so maybe with less certainty, we do predict that extra contributions due to COVID relief programs will likely offset this and delay an expected downturn in CSI spending thereafter. The top three, I'm sorry, now I'm still on the previous slide.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. The top 3 contributing sectors remain the same as previous years, with basic resources contributing the most. That's made up mostly of mining and accounted for about 1/4 of the spending. This is followed by contributions from the retail sector, and then thirdly by the financial services sector. In our sample of 75 corporates, half of companies reported an increase in expenditure, less than last year and continuing the downward trend over the last 3 years. And the main reason behind this is an increase in corporate profits. It's worth noting that the changes in expenditure included in the research are largely pre-COVID, as respondents completed their research based on the latest full financial year, which in most cases ended before the onset of the pandemic. Then lastly, in terms of non-cash giving as a proportion of total CSI giving, we found that around 1/4 of companies reported giving in the form of products, services, and time. And this constituted 16% of expenditure, which was the highest ever recorded by Trialogue, but due mainly to the inclusion of a large retailer giving in that form. Then moving on to the next slide, looking at the distribution of CSI expenditure, we found that corporate supported projects in an average of 4.6 sectors, broadly consistent with previous years, and still, unfortunately, significantly higher than companies in the US, which a study showed in 2017 supported an average of only 1.4 sectors, so a lot more focused we see globally. In terms of the outlook for this, companies reported that they expect reported that they expect the number of developmental focus areas to either increase or stay the same over the next 5 years, with only around 1/4 of companies expecting to become more focused by decreasing their number of focus areas. Now, this is slightly at odds with the stated intention of companies to become more strategic in their CSI. In terms of developmental sectors, education, one of our country's greatest developmental challenges, was again the most popular corporate cause, supported by 95% of companies and accounting for around an average of half of CSI spend in 2020. This was followed, as it usually is, by social and community development, which accounted for 15% of CSI spend, and in the health sector. For the first time, and continuing its upward trajectory from previous years, disaster relief became the 3rd most supported sector in terms of number of companies supporting it, but still accounted for a relatively small 4% average spend. And I'm sure we will see this increase next year. Our least supported sector is and has been in previous years social advocacy. However, encouragingly, 61% of companies expect their support for social advocacy to increase over the next few years. Then looking at expenditure by region, in 2020, companies supported an average of 4.7 provinces, excluding national projects, which almost 2/3 of companies supported, and which received half of average CSI expenditure. Gauteng was again the most supported province and received an average of 19% of CSI spend. More companies then supported KZN, which received 5% of expenditure, followed by the Western Cape, which received slightly more at 6% of average CSI expenditure. Only 8 companies surveyed supported projects outside of South Africa in our research. Then in line with previous years, NPOs were the most likely recipients of CSI funding, with 91% of corporates relying on NPO to carry out the implementation of their programs in some form, and with companies receiving around 54% of CSI spend on average. This was then followed by government institutions, which includes your universities, schools, clinics, and hospitals. Social enterprises were funded by around 1/5 of companies, but received a surprising small 2% of company CSI spend. An average of, from the NPO side, around an average of 27% of NPO income came from South African companies. Then moving on to strategic considerations for CSI, thanks Neo. We found that all companies in the sample, except 2, had a CSI strategy. This year we looked at alignment to 2 major policy frameworks that you'll all be aware of. The UN Sustainable Development Goals and the South African National Development Plan. And we found that corporates were interestingly more aligned to the UN SDGs than to the NDP, with over half of them integrating these frameworks into their CSI on a frequent basis. Then just less than, moving on to monitoring and evaluation, just less than half of companies had a stated policy on M&E, yet encouragingly 80% of companies expect that efforts to monitor and evaluate projects will increase. And this is certainly a trend that we see in our consulting side of our business. Despite more than half of corporates having neither a policy or a budget for M&E, and only 2/3 providing output data in the survey, 95% of companies claim to measure and record outcomes for at least some projects. Just over half of corporates measured outcomes for all grants, regardless of size. Then just to highlight the point, obviously the distinction between output and outcome data was alluded to by our judges in the award. But really output data is a record of goods and services that were delivered, whereas your outcome data would be a record of actual changes that occurred as a result of the good or service that was delivered. Certainly more difficult to achieve and measure, but also a more accurate measure of a program's success. And the latter is really what you want to be reporting on, particularly for your strategic and your flagship programs, where there is a larger quantum of investment. Then lastly on the slide on looking at employee volunteer programs, just over 3/4 of companies had EVPs, most of whom had a stated EVP policy and a separate budget. Companies with EVP supported around 3.8 types of initiatives, the most common of these being your company organized volunteering initiatives, and followed by fundraising and collection drives. NPO's most preferred type of support is Give As You Earn, which was offered by around 1/4 of companies in our sample. Then this year, Trialogue, we included a series of questions related to the impact of COVID-19 on CSI. Thanks, Nero. You can flip to the next. Thank you. In the early months of the pandemic, when the research was conducted, the reported impact of COVID-19 on CSI expenditure was quite mixed, with almost equal numbers of companies reporting increased expenditure, or no change in expenditure, or reduced expenditure. Only 4% of companies said that they had put all funding on hold. As mentioned earlier, Trialogue expects to see an increase in reported CSI spending in our 2021 research, which will capture these contributions that have often been made, I think, with funds additional to the CSI budget. And then we see on that right-hand, the image on the right-hand side of the slide, that corporates were most likely to have reduced or adapted their CSI programs in response to COVID-19, with only 4% saying that all programs had been ceased or put on hold. We also asked NPOs the same questions around the impact of COVID-19, and found that most were likely to have adapted their programs or to have reduced their programs. However, almost 1/5 of NPOs said that program funding had been put on hold. So yeah, a bit of a different picture to what we saw from the corporates. So only 2% of corporates said that there had actually been no impact at all on programs, whereas 14% of companies reported this. Then sectors supported by corporates in response to COVID-19 were obviously food security, which was supported by almost 2/3 of companies, followed by healthcare interventions and contributions to the Solidarity Fund. Then lastly, and for, these always highly anticipated, many of you will know that each year Trialogue asks corporates and NPOs to name the top 3 corporates or NPOs that they perceive to be having the most developmental impact. Thanks. Now you can flip to the next slide. So congratulations to all the companies that made it onto the 2020 top 10 list. Vodacom, special congratulations to you, ranked first by companies for the 4th consecutive year. And this year you were also ranked first by NPOs, having been in 3rd position as ranked by NPOs for the previous 3 years. Anglo-American was ranked 2nd by companies, up from 9th position last year, and ranked 4th by NPOs. Then 3rd ranked was Nedbank, which this year joined 2nd place as ranked by NPOs. And then in 4th and 5th place in the corporate rankings was Old Mutual and Woolworths, with First Rand ranked 5th, 5th place by the NPOs. So I hope you've enjoyed some of the highlights of the research, and I hope that you're able to use them to continue to optimize your social impacts and take it to that next level. There's a wealth of information in the handbook. We also cover topics such as governance and management of CSI, capacity building of NPOs that Kathy touched on earlier, and then also a lot more detail on support for developmental subsectors in Chapter 2. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. Now back on our program, we now welcome Kathy Duff to share on the Q&A discussion.
Thanks, No. I think we can actually probably turn the slides off. Firstly, I just want to add my congratulations to the 3 commendable projects. So Nedbank, Transnet, and GrowthPoint. Well done. And also thanks for being here, Nedbank and GrowthPoint. And a big congratulations to Pick and Pay. I think this is the most difficult part to do virtually is the awards. And just to let you know, there is a physical award, there is a certificate, and it will be couriered to you, Nadine. Also, congratulations to Vodacom for once again being rated the top by all of our survey participants. So we had some time now for some Q&A, and Anne's still here, Rebecca's still here, Carl's still here, and I'm still around. So if there are any questions, I've only got 2 at the moment, we can go through that. You can raise your hand, you can put it in the Q&A box or in the chat box just before we close. So I'm going to move to the 2 that I do have. Neo, do you want to turn off the slides?
Sure.
Thanks. And then Rebecca, if you could come back online, and Ant. Okay, so I see from Prof. Ndwaba, thanks, that you talk about the link with the SDGs, and keen to see the link to the UNGPs. And I think that's a great idea. So in this version of the handbook, as I mentioned, our theme was originally around progress towards the SDGs and the NDP, but we haven't looked specifically at the UNGPs, and they do speak to that broader role of business and society. So it's definitely something that we can look to next year. And then Rebecca, there's a question for you around the shift. Do we see any shift from grant making to social investment that require some kind of financial return or repayment? So not purely grants, different types of mechanisms. I know you spoke briefly about social enterprises, but if you've got a comment on that.
Thanks for the question. Not particularly, but I say in the consulting, not that came through in the research, and that's where we would look to the question that asks about social, about what types of recipients you support, and we haven't seen much of an uptick in support for social enterprises, but in the consulting side of the business, we are seeing a lot of interest around impact bonds and performance-based bonds, and innovative financing mechanisms for programs. So yeah, there definitely is a lot of interest in that. It's still a very new and developing kind of sector in South Africa. But we do see a lot of corporates asking questions around that and expressing a lot of interest in more innovative financing mechanisms. And yeah, also a lot of interest in helping MPOs to become more self-sustainable, definitely, especially, you know, given the year that we've had and the need to try and shift to this model as much as possible. So yeah, an interesting area to watch.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, and I do think it's something where we've actually expected to see more growth in previous years, but it has been slow. I think some CSI departments have been hamstrung, so there's still the need to kind of work around that, or for different parts of the business to look at these more innovative financial models. Nadine, I can see you still on the line, so if you could unmute yourself, we have a question for you. It's from Ketling, asking, they'd like to know how Pick n Pay is measuring your impact, and what methodology are you applying to measure the impact of that school club?
So there's a couple ways that we measure our impact. The first is through evaluation forms we've got at each school we've got contact teachers that we work with directly. So they complete evaluation forms that has a host of different questions that we need to be measured on. The second way is through focus groups. So in August each year, we do focus groups on what content schools are looking for, and then we go and find the partners to create that content with. And the third is external research. So every couple of years, we do external research, measuring perception of Pick n Pay with the schools, measuring the quality of educational content we're providing. There's a whole range of questions that looks at both the impact for the schools and the impact on Pick n Pay.
Thanks, Nadine. And just to say also that there is a write-up of that program in this edition of the handbook where there is more information on all of those outcomes. So there's a 2-page write-up on that. Okay, I've seen another question's just come through in the chat from Wendy. So it seems that much of CSI is heavily orientated towards social issues and causes. Do we see any trend towards green ecosystems, environmental? Rebecca, do you want to take that?
Yeah, just give me a second. I'm just reaching back in my
yeah. So I'm
read the chapter 1,000 times.
Yeah. From the CSI side, the support for environment is actually fairly low. I think where companies have a growing interest and more support for the environment is actually outside of CSI. It's in their core operations, it's in their supply chains, it's in their manufacturing and what they're doing. Rebecca, maybe you can give us the figures for environment.
Yeah, that is true, Kathy. This year we saw 38% of corporates supporting the environment sector, which was exactly the same as last year, and it actually received only 4% of average CSI expenditure, just down slightly from the previous year. And I think, yeah, to Kathy's point, I think one of the reasons is that CSI expenditure in terms of the codes, and that has to be directed towards beneficiaries, previously disadvantaged individuals. And obviously there is a way of tying that into the environment, as you know, we all are very much part of our environment and our environment is part of us. But as Kathy said, I think often that investment happens outside of strict CSI spend. Yeah.
Thank you. Wendy, I hope that answers your question. Are there any other questions or comments in the chat or Q&A or from the attendees? Okay, if there isn't, I think Neo's just lost connection. It would be the very last of our events in 2020 where we're having the technical issues. That's the kind of year it's been. But
yeah.
Welcome back, Neo.
Thank you.
And I don't think there's any more questions or comments. So just from my side to let everyone know, thanks for joining us. The handbook is now live. It is available for free download on our website. We hope you find it really interesting and useful in your work. And I'm going to hand over to Nera just for the closing.
Thank you, Kathy. As you mentioned, 2020 has been that kind of year where we're either glitching or fading in the net. But we'd like to thank everybody for supporting us, as we mentioned earlier in our program. And well done to all the organizations that heeded to the social call for this cause. And in light of 2021, as Trialogue, we're excited that on our platforms, we've got our packages that we're offering for our knowledge sharing packages that we're offering, which will soon be open after this launch, for including our conference, our handbook, and the Knowledge Hub, as I mentioned earlier. And along with that, you can contact myself or Mahlo for further details around webinars and the ads that we'll be showing on our website and more OPEDs. And we'll be couriering the hard copy to each of you as participates in the handbook. And thank you again. And we include inside the handbook, we'll be including the 2021 calendar featuring the lockdown collection artwork. And thank you once again for everybody virtually attending the Trialogue Business and Society 23rd edition launch. And we trust that you enjoyed everything and all the information that was shared with you. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you for all the insights and the research that contributed to the knowledge that we now have. And well done again to the Trialogue team for putting together another outstanding industry publication. And enjoy the rest of your week, everybody. And that's all from me. Thank you. I think now we've come to the end of our program. I don't know if anybody else would like to share the last few words, but I think everybody else is now leaving the platform. And thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Nera.
Thanks, Rebecca. Well done.